There's a refrain that we heard at the end of the story on Christmas Eve that's the same as the refrain we hear at the end of the gospel text from Luke today. And it's about Mary. Said at the end of the birth story and at the end of this original Home Alone story for the ages in Jesus, that Mary treasured all of these things in her heart. Mary treasured all of these things in her heart. If you think about Mary and Joseph's story, these are not necessarily pleasant stories for them that you think about treasuring. A journey to Bethlehem to be registered in the midst of being right at the cusp of giving birth to a child, of not finding a place of room in the inn, being afraid a little bit and alone. And yet God comes and meets them there, and there are new treasures to be held. And then similarly this morning, in the story of Jesus when he's 12, if anyone as a parent has ever experienced that feeling of knowing that you have lost your child, you know that that feeling is not one that you normally treasure. It's the highest form of anxiety, of fearing the worst. But yet, in the midst of the end of this story of them returning to Jerusalem and finding Jesus in the temple, it said that Mary treasured these things in her heart. Treasures in the midst of struggle and difficulty. Treasures in the midst of anxiety and fear. Perhaps that's our theme here for our last Sunday in 2021. This is the last Sunday we will be together this year. A year that many of us, if we look back a year from now, said maybe 2021 will be better than 2020, the year that came before it. Maybe in some ways that's been true. Maybe we've had a little bit more capacity to be together, to return to some form of life that we were accustomed to prior to the pandemic. But for most people, if you sit down and listen, they'll tell you 2021 was just as hard, if not more hard, than the year that came before it. And if we're honest about this year that has come before, as we think about the realities of life that we've been in, I think one of the realities that we have faced is coming to terms with what we have lost. Coming to grips that life, the way we once thought was normal, that life, and maybe some of the illusions or ways that we covered up difficulty in the world around us, that we have had to come in this last year to accepting what this new normal, this new reality is all about. And at the end of this year, it would be very easy to stay stuck or to dwell in those stories of lostness, those stories of what we fear we may never gain again, those stories of anxiety while we still search and grope and yearn to find life in a different way than what we've had to deal with these last 2 years. But perhaps this morning is a question for us of contemplation. In the midst of struggle, in the midst of lostness, in the midst of anxiety and fear, what are we going to continue to treasure in our heart? What moments in the midst of sorrow can we hold on to like Mary and say, you know what? It's okay. God was here with us in the midst of it. That Jesus, my son, was in my Father's house all along, and it's okay. Where can we find those treasures in the midst of a hard year? Well, one thing we know together as a community that we've lost this year is many of our loved ones. We've said goodbye to people we know we will not find again in this earthly form, in this time and place in life. And for all of the funerals that we've gathered for here in this space this year, there are many treasures that I will take away, treasures that I am blessed and privileged to have had as a pastor. Of those weeks sitting bedside with people like Pat Senstedt, of meeting with Sandy Brundage after Ralph died, not knowing that that might be one of the last times I would spend speaking with her, of visiting with Paul Parsons when we weren't sure if that was going to be possible because of COVID restrictions, of laughing with Walt and Lily in the weeks leading up to his death, and visiting Jean Ryan here just in the last weeks leading up to Christmas, seeing her in the hospital and joking with her as new COVID precautions and visitation restrictions were being put into place, that if she didn't want to see her kids come one day, that she could always ask me to come instead. If you know Jean has a quite contagious laugh. And even from a hospital bed, in the most difficult of days, she laughed. Those are treasures that I will hold in my heart in the midst of grief and sorrow and loss. Treasures of loved ones, of time spent with family, of moments where we know that even though we are preparing to lose something or someone, that God is still somehow there in the midst of it, that love has still shown up, even when we fear love might be lost. This morning, whether you're online or here in person, I wonder if you can find a little bit of space in your heart to go to this morning. In the midst of the emotions that you might have with you this Christmas, in the midst of the things that you feel like you may have lost this year. People, jobs, experiences with families, traditions. What can you find to hold on to still treasure? To still hold in the midst of these moments and to say, you know what? In the midst of what I may have lost, there is still something that I have found. A connection, a relationship, a new experience, a moment of holiness, the presence of love. Take just a moment with a little bit of silence here in this sermon today. Allow your heart to think about what treasures you may be holding close in your heart this Christmas. For we are gathered like Mary and Joseph in the midst of chaos, in the midst of uncertainty still to come in this year ahead, knowing that there will be losses to come, that there will continue to be change, that there will be fear and anxieties. Just as we see the ball drop this upcoming Friday night, and we say maybe 2022 will be a little bit different, we know deep down there will be struggle. Like Mary, let's hold on to those treasures. Let's know what we can come back to. And let's hear the words of Jesus again, speaking to worried, anxious parents. And why did you worry? Didn't you know where I would be? That I would be here in my Father's house. Today, on this Sunday after Christmas, let's know and trust that even though Jesus or faith or love may feel lost, that Jesus is here dwelling with us. That Jesus is right here in his Father's house, not a temple some far off place, or just one particular sanctuary. But Jesus' Father's house is all of us. It's every human being. It's every aspect of creation. It's every breath that we take. Jesus is saying, why do you worry? Don't you know where I am? I am right here with you in my Father's house. What a gift to treasure. The presence of God, love incarnate itself, found again here in our hearts, in our communities and our world this day. With Mary, let us treasure that gift. Merry Christmas, and God's peace be with each of you. Amen.